Everyone is talking about Travis Hunter and Tet McMillan as the top wide receivers in this year's draft class. And they should be, but there's a receiver in this class who just put up 1,200 yards and 14 touchdowns and no one's talking about it. And there's multiple guys like this in this draft class. I'm going to talk about 5 of them today. These guys are going completely overlooked and they shouldn't be. And we're going to start with Isaiah Bond out of Texas, and this guy is oh so polarizing. He's a 5'11", 180-pound wide receiver, and the reason why he's so polarizing is for a few reasons. He was injured in college, and the big one more recently at the NFL Combine, he said he was going to set the 40-time record, and he didn't. He ran in the 4.4s, which is good, but not setting the record. He then had a second attempt at the 40-time, and as you can see on Player Profiler right here, he ran a 4.39 40-time. Once again, fantastic. Then he goes out at his pro day more recently. He runs in the 4.3s again. It was a low 4.3s, 4.34, 4.35, depending on the reports that you were looking at. So all of this is showing us that this is a really fast player. People are just anchored on the fact that he said he was going to break the record, and he didn't. But if you actually want to look at some other things here that he did at the Combine, he goes out there, and according to Nash Talks Texas on Twitter, you can see he runs a 24.5 mile per hour on the gauntlet drill, which is like actually going out there and catches passes, trying to simulate real football speed. And I was going to say his teammate, but he actually transferred there this past year. So Xavier Worthy, who also played at Texas, the fastest wide receiver ever to attend the Combine, ran a slower gauntlet time. So Bond is faster than him in the gauntlet. Now we're talking by splits of seconds here, but it's just to show you that like his 40 time wasn't bad. His gauntlet drill was good. This is a very fast and explosive player, but there's obviously more to it than that when you're coming to the NFL as a receiver. So let's move forward into the next piece of this puzzle, and it's going to be his production. He started his first 2 years at Alabama. He didn't do much in 2022. It was a loaded wide receiver room, really hard to put up numbers. But then in 2023, he actually stood out. He earned 77 targets, competing against some top talents as well, a 24% target share while over there at Alabama. So all of this was great. He then says, you know what? I have an opportunity now. Adonai Mitchell left Texas. Xavier Worthy left Texas. I have a chance to go to Texas and be the top guy. And that's what he did. He transferred to Texas in 2024. And all in all, he still put up some decent numbers. Like he was dealing with injuries for probably half the season or so. He still earns 56 targets, 540 yards, a career high 15.9 yards per attempt. He also contributed as well on the ground. He had 4 carries, 98 yards, a big touchdown as a rusher as well. And when you go through his game logs, we can start at the bottom here. He had a great start to the season. I mean, look at these games right here to start the season. You're talking 60 yards, 50 plus yards, 100 yards, 75 yards, 74 yards, and then he unfortunately gets injured and he just never regained that momentum. You can see all the game logs on the screen. 5 yards, 11, 55, 48. He ends the season with games of 0 yards in the college football playoff, 22 and 8 yards. So basically this was a player averaging like 75 yards per game to start the season, got injured, and then he started averaging like 20 yards per game. I think the injury is a reason why. And if you are curious, the way that Bond was winning, at least at Texas, he was playing about 74% of his snaps out of the slot, while his teammate, who's also in this draft class, maybe going to be a first-round pick, Matthew Golden, was their primary outside receiver. Now here's the type of player that Bond is. Here's where he was winning on film, at least from what I saw. He can run all the routes at all 3 levels of the field, either on the outside or in the slot. He has explosive acceleration, amazing change of direction, and elite deep ball speed while also being a crafty route runner. But of course, there are some negatives to his profile, and here's a few. He never had a consistently high workload as being the main guy. He can get knocked down on his routes. He might rely too heavily on his pure speed at times, and he struggled off the line of scrimmage against press coverage. Now, when I watched him play, and I have to try and think of like a player comparison, I did see some Jalen Waddle to his game, which is encouraging. Now, despite all of the cons that people are throwing out there and trying to throw dirt on Isaiah Bond's name for whatever reason, trying to shoot down a 20-year-old kid because he said he was going to run the fastest combine, who cares, right? He's still going to be a 3rd-round pick in the NFL draft. At least that's what people are expecting mock drafts out there. I think that he will be as well. I think a team might even reach on him in the 2nd round because of his skill set. There's just a lot of teams who could potentially get him. If he goes to the Rams, that's obviously great. Goes to the Commanders, maybe a little bit buried, but in terms of the Commanders offense, great. The Eagles as a wide receiver 3 could be very exciting as well. So he's kind of like a hodgepodge of where he can land. The Bills could be interesting, although that's kind of overlapping skill sets with one Khalil Shakir. So he can really land anywhere in the 2nd or 3rd round at this point. Name your team that has a hard or a soft need for wide receiver. Bond could be there. All right, next up, let's go to TCU and talk about their wide receiver last year who finally broke out in his final year in Jack Bech. He's a 6'1", 214-pound wide receiver, really good size overall. And then he goes to the NFL Combine. He doesn't run the 40 time. So this is a little bit of a concern. He does his jumps. They weren't great. They were basically average. His agility was above average, and you can kind of see that on film. We'll get into it. So I would say like him going to the Combine didn't really help him. It showed us that he doesn't have elite burst. It showed us that he has above average agility, but that's about it. But thankfully, he does have his final year of production in college, because look at this. His first 3 years in college, he spent the first 2 at LSU. He was basically a slot wide receiver. He did did really nothing here. 489 yards, 200 yards. He transfers to TCU, has just 11 catches. And at this point, it looks like, okay, in his 3 years of college, he's totaled like 800 total yards through 3 seasons. Probably not going to be an NFL player. Let's see what he does in his senior year. Luckily for him, he broke out. He ends up breaking out in his final year at TCU. He goes for over 1,000 receiving yards, sets a career high 16.7 yards per reception, a 19% target share. All these are career highs. And the most impressive part is he actually moved to the outside. He was mostly a slot receiver at LSU in his first year at TCU, and then in his final year, moves to the outside and honestly just starts having way more success. And you can see some of that success in the game logs here to start the season. I mean, it was like right away you knew that this guy was going to have a good year. You can see all the way down here, August 30th to start the season, 139-yard game, a 200-yard game, 166, 131. 4 out of his first 5 games, he's going for at least 130 yards and 6 receptions in all of them. I mean, we knew the breakout was coming. He started hot, didn't really finish all that hot, but still had solid games of 77, 98 yards I'm looking at in his game log, so a good season overall. Now, when I watch his tape, it's obviously way different his first 3 years. He didn't have as much playing time. He was playing out of the slot, but when I watch it in 2024 and he's playing on the outside way more, it's impressive. He showed yards after the catch ability. He's a physical receiver with his size and wins at the top of routes. He showed great ball tracking in 2024 and an IQ to break down defenses and find the soft spots. If I had to point out just areas that he did struggle, the long speed is definitely a concern, probably why he didn't run the 40 time. He needs a little bit sharper of route running, especially on the outside. There was only 1 season of production as well, and the blocking efforts were inconsistent. Honestly, when I watch him play, I think that he fits a lot of what Cedric Tillman from the Cleveland Browns, that type of receiver overall. Big play receiver on the outside, kind of inconsistencies to his game, but a lot of potential. Right now, Bech is actually projected to go in the 2nd round, which is kind of surprising to me. I mean, late 2nd round, so it could be early 3rd round. That's probably where he slides in, depending on team needs at this point. He is like one of the few outside receivers that you can get after the 1st round. These 215-pound guys who proved, at least for a year, he can play on the outside. Steelers don't really make much sense now that they got DK Metcalf, in my opinion, although if they wanted to put that versatility with his slot play, I do think that you could see the Jaguars making some sense for sure here. Brian Thomas on the outside, Bech being an outside receiver who can move into the slot, and 3 wide receiver sets. Seahawks as well. Nathan Yonke from PFF points out, I think the Seahawks make some sense as well. Right now, they basically have 2 slot receivers in Cooper Kupp and Jackson Smith-Njigba. Bech could be their outside guy. Next up is somebody that I'm going to like a little bit more after I watched his film a little bit more in depth, and this is Kyle Williams out of Washington State. He's a 5'11", 190-pound receiver, and I think he's definitely going overlooked right now in the NFL draft. He only helped himself at the NFL Combine. According to Player Profiler, runs a 4.4 40 time. That's pretty good. Well above average speed, you can say. His burst was average, but I think the fact that he goes out there and he runs that 4.4 40 time in a wide receiver class that was surprisingly pretty fast, especially at the top end, these 1st to 3rd round picks, that's going to help Kyle Williams. Now, Williams spent his first 3 years. He had 5 years in college at UNLV. He basically didn't play in 2020. In 2021 and 2022, he has pretty solid production, 40 plus receptions each year, over 500 receiving yards. He's earning targets 20% of the time or so. And then he ends up transferring for his final 2 seasons to Washington State, where right away, right when he gets there in 2023 in his first year, he puts up some strong numbers. He puts up career high 61 catches, 843 yards, and he's looking like a pretty talented player who has some NFL potential depending on what he does in 2024. And then, I mean, he just broke all the way out in 2024 to the point where now he's definitely going to be an NFL wide receiver. 70 catches, another career high, almost 1,200 receiving yards, winning downfield with 17.1 yards per reception. All of this looks absolutely fantastic. 14 touchdowns as well. He also contributed on the ground, some in some end arounds, 9 carries, about 60 yards or so. So he was getting involved everywhere as the main option in his final year for Washington State. And the nice thing was, Washington State doesn't play a lot of talented teams, you can say, compared to some other programs out there in other conferences, but we actually got to see him go out there in some tough contests against a ranked Boise State team last year. He has 9 catches, 142 yards and a touchdown. That's good. Against a ranked Syracuse team, he pops off for 10 catches, 172 yards, a touchdown. That film will be the one that a lot of people will point to when they're saying this can be an NFL receiver. He looked great in that game. Overall, Kyle Williams, he's a versatile player. He played about 75% of his snaps on the outside. Teams will need that, a fast guy on the outside, but he also moved into the slot and found some success there. When I watched his film, especially at Washington State, where he started to develop in 23 and 24, this is what I saw. His release package is maybe the best part of his game. He's explosive, quick, and routinely wins at the line of scrimmage. He has deep ball tracking ability, but also pairs it with a unique ability for his size and play style to get some yards after the catch as well. In terms of the negatives, they're kind of going to be the same for these types of players, these faster guys who may be somewhat undersized on the outside and like these 3rd or 4th round picks. The negatives are he struggles with blocking, his catch technique needs refinement, and there are some concerns at times that he drifts upfield and doesn't go towards the ball. When I watch him, I kind of see some Christian Kirk to his game, like can be a vertical threat and can even be that threat out of the slot. Maybe a little bit of Stephon Diggs as well, like a combination of those two guys. Right now, a mock draft database, the consensus has him going as a 4th round pick. Makes sense. I think he goes anywhere in the mid to late 3rd round to the mid to late 4th round. In terms of where he can land at that point, I mean, it can be anywhere. The Bills, do I think the Bills need that when they have guys like Keon Keon Coleman on the outside, Khalil Shakur in 2 wide receiver sets. Not sure. I think the Browns could definitely use it. I mean, Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman are there, sure, but I think they can maybe use some depth when you're talking about a 4th-round pick. Jaguars, like we mentioned earlier, could definitely use some wide receiver help outside or in the slot and just find somebody next to Brian Thomas with Christian Kirk on and Evan Ingram in the middle of the field gone. Okay, next up is going to be Tory Horton, who I think is going to be definitely widely overlooked. Like, out of all the guys in this video, I think Horton will probably be the most overlooked. I think he might go the latest in the draft, late 4th, early 5th round. Probably a mistake. 6'3", 196-pound wide receiver, goes to the NFL Combine, only helps himself, runs a 4.41 40 time. That's all he does. He says, okay, his agent says you ran a 4.41, well above average, nearly top 10% for your size ever to attend the Combine. There's no reason to go out there and jump or do your agility and potentially hurt your stock. You only just helped it. So Horton's another player who played 5 years. In 2020, he didn't really do anything at Nevada. In 2021 was his first year of production. Looks good. 659 yards. He was so good that he ended up transferring over to Colorado State, a team that has found some success over the past couple of years in their program. And you can see here, right in 2022, he pops off over 1,100 yards. 2023, over 1,100 yards once again. He's having massive games during this time. They had an overtime game back in 2023. You might remember it against Colorado when Colorado was first coming up with Deion Sanders talking a bunch, Travis Hunter looking like an absolute stud on both sides of the ball. They had this rivalry game, say the word, Sal, with Colorado State, and this is what happened. Horton looked like the best player on the field, even with Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders there and all these other wide receivers Colorado had. He puts up 16 catches, 133 yards, and a touchdown in that overtime nail-biting game that Colorado ends up winning. He then goes out later in the season and in a matchup against a Utah State, I believe it was. Let's see here. Yeah, against Utah Tech. So Utah Tech, again, this is not a good team by any means, but what do you want to see? You want to see a very talented NFL type level player dominating not very good teams in college. 10 catches, 227 yards, and 3 touchdowns. His 2023 was easily the best we saw of him. He was second in the conference in yardage, and the only reason it didn't get better in 2024 is because he suffered a brutal knee injury. As you can see right here, he only plays 5 games, 26 catches, 356 yards, but he was having more yards per reception than he did in his best season in 23. He was looking really good. The catch rate, the early film through those games was solid for him, but then he had the knee injury. But the crazy thing was, despite the knee injury and not finishing the season, he still attended the Combine, like we said, and ran a 4.41 40 time. Like, you could probably assume that this dude wasn't 100% healthy when he went out there at the Combine, probably why he didn't do the jumps as well outside of just running a good 40 time. The fact that he was able to get ready in time and run that 40 time shows a lot about just his work ethic, determination, ability to heal, all that. Now, when I'm watching his film, I did obviously look at some of those games from 2024, but I'm really looking at what he did in that big season in 2023, especially when he had these blow-up games against better competition like Colorado. And when I watched the film, I saw great feet. Maybe his best skill was ball tracking. Makes sense. He was an outfielder in baseball in high school. He's great in and out of his breaks and near the sidelines, and he's fluid after the catch. In terms of where he struggled, and this is why he's not going to be like a 2nd-round pick, maybe though, maybe some team will take him, but these are the negatives. He struggles against physical press coverage. He sometimes can get into problems with drops trying to run before he actually catches the ball, and his blocking efforts need improvement. So right now, Horton's projected to be a 4th-round pick, a late 4th-round pick. I think that makes sense, but like this type of profile, I think a team can fall in love with him and take him in the late 2nd, probably a little bit crazy, but 3rd round. I think this is a player who reminds me a lot of maybe like a combination between a Robert Woods, if you remember some of the prime days that he had back in the day, especially with the Rams early on with the Bills, and also a Robbie, or better known now as Chosen Anderson, like a combination of those players. All right, now before we get to the #1 most overlooked player that I want to talk about in this video, I just want to let you know that during the offseason, most fantasy football players, you watch this channel during the season, most of them fall asleep during the offseason. And that's a complete mistake, because then by the time August rolls back around, they're completely behind when you, watching these videos right now, can stay ahead. And another way you can stay ahead in just 4 minutes per week is with my weekly newsletter. It's linked in the description below. I'll put a QR code up on the screen right now as well if you're watching on your TV or your laptop. All you have to do is enter your email right here, and in just 4 minutes per week, I'll make sure that you're the smartest fantasy player in your league and you're up to date. You can join over 40,000 other people, so some of your league mates might be in there, which means you should probably join anyway, and get this fantasy club, the fantasy club newsletter, sent to you multiple times a week. It'll take you like 4 minutes at most to read, and it'll make sure you're up to date on the most important news, prospects, free agency moves, players to be watching, things that went wrong last year to improve on this year, all that type of stuff. QR code's on the screen, link in the description below. It's completely free. All right, now for that most overlooked player. If it's not Horton, it's neck and neck with Tai Felton out of Maryland. Somewhat similar players, although slightly different in some major ways. 6'1", 183 pounds. I mean, Tai Felton is just a speedster. This guy's an absolute burner for Maryland. Ran a 4.37 40 time at the Combine. Showed elite bursts, which is not really known from his game. We knew he was explosive, but this explosiveness, 92nd percentile jumps, which means like just one of the best at the Combine overall. That really helped him. In fact, he had the 3rd fastest 10-yard split out of any wide receiver, so he can get out of his breaks really quick, and that translated when I watched his film getting off the line of scrimmage. Now, Felton spent all 4 years in college at Maryland. He got better every single season. He got more involvement. The offense overall got better with the quarterback around him. 48 catches in 2023. Breaks out his final year, 96 catches, over 1,100 yards. Shows that he can be an NFL receiver receiver while seeing an elite 30% target share. He was third in the Big Ten in yards, second in the Big Ten in receptions, arguably the best wide receiver in the entire Big Ten. I say arguably. And I say it kind of tongue in cheek, like you obviously have to account for Ohio State. Emeka Egbuka going to be a first or second round pick, and you had Jeremiah Smith, maybe the best receiver in the country last year. But other than those guys at Ohio State, might have been Tai Felton in the Big Ten. And the dude started his season off in 2024 extremely hot. Like, I mean, it was impossible for him to continue and sustain what he was doing. Look at this here at the bottom of the screen. You see August 31st, their first game, 178 yards, 152, 117, 157. I mean, there's games of 14, 9, and 11 receptions in here. He went absolutely berserk to start off his August and September, and he really put his name on the map. Now, this is predominantly an outside receiver, played there 70% of the time, but was able to move into the slot on some 3 wide receiver sets, which will be important at the next level. Now, I mentioned that his 10-yard split at the combine kind of translated to what I saw in film getting off the line of scrimmage. Here's also what I saw from the film. His stutter move is very effective. His great burst and speed creates separation. He sells his body well on routes, and amazing field awareness near the line of scrimmage helps him a lot in contested catches. In terms of areas where he does struggle, it's going to be similar to the Kyle Williams that we talk about. Some of these somewhat undersized 185, 190 pound receivers who can burn on the outside. He struggles through contact and with blockings, and we did see a dip in production last year after his first 4 games, also dropped 8 passes in 2024. Now, Tai Felton is one of the fastest wide receivers in the class, and speed alone, especially in the middle rounds, will usually lead to you getting drafted by the 3rd or 4th round. He's projected right now to go in the 4th round. He reminds me a lot, if we're talking about NFL players, I think I've said this in the past as well when we were discussing the NFL Combine winners, and Felton was one of them. He reminded me a lot of Marquez Valdes-Scantling, which you might be saying, he's like a nobody. Valdes-Scantling had some pretty good years in the NFL and consistent, or I wouldn't say consistent, his hands weren't anything but that, but I would just say he was a consistent presence for the Green Bay Packers, at times the Chiefs, at times maybe once or twice the Bills. Basically, you would spend a 3rd or a 4th round pick to get a guy like MVS, especially the Packers version of that, on your team to be a number 3 burner receiver for you. So these are the wide receivers who are going completely overlooked right now. The running back version, if you haven't watched it, it came out earlier this week. It's going to pop up right here. And then the top 10 wide receivers in the NFL draft, that video, if you haven't seen it yet, will pop up here as well. Be sure to get my free newsletter. In just 4 minutes per week, you'll be the most up-to-date fantasy player in your league. Appreciate you all a ton other than that, and I'll see you in the next one.